Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you in our beautiful and historic Proctor's Theater. Before we get started, I do have some special guests that I would like to acknowledge who are with us today. From the New York State Assembly, Assemblywoman Pat Fahey. She is joined along by Albany County Executive Dan McCoy, the Chairman of the Columbia County Board of Supervisors, Matt Morrell, the Chairman of the Greene County Legislature, Kevin Lewis, the Chairman of the Warren County Board of Supervisors, Kevin Garrity, and some of our local mayors from the great city of Schenectady, Mayor Gary McCarthy, from the city of Albany, Mayor Kathy Sheehan, and from the city of Saratoga Springs, Mayor Joanne Yepsen. And our host here at Proctor's CEO Philip Morris is here. And many of my fellow cabinet members are also with us today, some of who you will be hearing from throughout the day, as well as we are joined by many local elected officials. Thank you for being here. This morning you are going to be hearing from Governor Andrew M. Cuomo. Let's give him a round of applause. You're also going to be hearing from the 16th Secretary of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Julian Castro. Mr. Secretary. And finally, you're going to be hearing from our great Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul. But before we do that, first a little bit more about today's Regional Sustainability Conference. Today we build upon the great work being done across the Capital Region by leveraging the expertise of local leaders in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors to discuss how they have maximized state programs to forge a better future. And today we're not going to hear just success stories, but best practices that serve as models for sustainable growth. The governor knows that a strong economy requires sustained investment, world-class infrastructure, and an unwavering focus on job creation. Here in the Capital Region, the importance of our solar, clean tech, and biomass industries from Glens Falls to Albany to Hudson and everywhere in between. We have seen our communities capitalize on their unique resources to advance growth, the expansion and revitalization of our downtowns to attract a diverse economic base, Troy, Schenectady, Albany, to name a few, and an increased focus on access, providing access to quality education for our young people throughout the Capital Region, all of which contributes to a sustainable economy and a foundation for our future leaders, and all of which would not be possible without the tremendous leadership of Governor Cuomo. Governor Cuomo has cultivated state and local partnerships through the REDCs to strengthen our communities, to help position the Capital Region as a place to live, work, and raise a family. His continued focus on upstate New York has restored economic progress and opportunity, and today all arrows are pointing upward. I know that through his continued dedication and investment in our region, the future looks bright and the possibilities are endless. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to help me welcome the 56th Governor of the great state of New York, Andrew M. Cuomo. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. What a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be in Schenectady. An extra special pleasure to be at Proctor's.
First, so many of my colleagues, so many people who are working in the field of community development. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, my Assembly and legislative colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you, colleagues from the Cabinet. And we have our great Lieutenant Governor who was introduced. Let's give her another round of applause. Brian Stratton, who's now doing a great job for the state of New York, but was a fantastic mayor right here. Let's give Brian Stratton a round of applause. And Mr. Secretary, Secretary Castro, pleasure, welcome to be with you. You know, Mr. Secretary is a familiar ring for me. I was at HUD for 8 years, and it was probably the toughest job that I ever loved, because HUD really is one of the tough jobs in the federal government. And I applaud the Secretary for the great work he's done. The HUD is a controversial statement by definition. What HUD says as a government agency is we can help poor people, and we can help revitalize poor places. That is the statement that HUD makes by its existence. So it drives the conservatives crazy, because it is antithetical to the purest conservative belief. Purest conservative belief is government doesn't work. Government cannot supplement what the private sector has left behind and abandoned. And government can't correct poor people problems or poor place problems. The only thing government can do is spend taxpayer money and make it worse. And HUD has always been a lightning rod for that discussion. But there was an honesty in it to me. The honesty was, well, either they're right or we are right. Either HUD can actually succeed and you can help poor people in poor places, and places do come back, and you can do it efficiently and effectively, or you can't. And HUD was always the laboratory for that experiment, and it was always the proving ground, and it was always the battleground for that discussion. Senator Dole, Robert Dole, was running for president one year, and I was on the platform with him, and I was at HUD. And he said in that campaign, if he won, he would abolish HUD. Big applause. Looked at me. We had been friendly. He said, "Don't worry, Andrew. I'll get you another job." He was very kind. It's also a phenomenally exhausting job, because this is a big country. And when you are HUD Secretary, you have to be everywhere. I was in every state in the United States. I was in most states over 10 times. My father was governor at the time. And I remember having a phone conversation with him once. And we were just shooting the breeze. And I said, boy, I'm wiped out. I'm wiped out. I was in California. I was in Oregon. I was in Washington. Now they want me to go to Arizona. I'm wiped out. He said, well, I was in Buffalo, and then I was in Schenectady, and then I was in Long Island. I said, you can't compare those two things. I said, as long as you are at an airport where if the plane doesn't take off, you can get in your car and drive home and be home in 5 hours, you're in good shape. My father didn't enjoy that. He really was not. He didn't have that great sense of humor in general, and he really didn't like to be poked fun at. So fast forward a few years later, I'm governor. He's sitting home. I call him up. I say, oh, boy, I'm exhausted. I was in Buffalo. I was in Schenectady. I was in Long Island. I'm dead. He said, what happened to you? Don't you remember when you were a big man in the federal government and you were going to California and Oregon? So it all comes around. But it is an incredibly difficult job, and Secretary Castro has done it extraordinarily well. So let's give him another round of applause. Mr. Secretary, you're in upstate New York, what we call upstate New York. There really is no place that is upstate New York, but we sort of call the whole place upstate New York. It's a little confusing. So you're in the capital region, which is in upstate New York. And the economy in upstate New York had been terrible for decades, literally decades. The capital region has been doing well recently, but places like Buffalo, you can go back 40, 50 years of decline in cities like Buffalo, Syracuse, Utica. And it's nothing different than you would see in manufacturing states in the Midwest. It's Western Pennsylvania. It's any state that was committed to a manufacturing economy. Upstate New York, you have to remember, really was the heart of early manufacturing. What made New York City was not just the New York Harbor. It was the fact that the New York Harbor led to the Hudson River. The Hudson River went up, and at this point led to what became known as the Erie Canal, which was built by New York State as a public works project all across the state, which then got you into the Great Lakes, which made New York the trade route. And it came through New York City, but it was the Erie Canal. And then all along the Erie Canal, you had some of the first and the biggest manufacturing companies. And that's what we did in upstate New York. We manufactured, and then we did the version of advanced manufacturing. We were IBM, we were Xerox, we were Kodak, et cetera. That disappears. Places like Buffalo did steel. That disappears. And then there's no tomorrow. There's no new economy. There's no transition. It's worse in upstate New York than many of the other states you visit because something else happened in upstate New York. The New York State Legislature, which is primarily made up of people from downstate New York, were, to put it kindly, inattentive to the needs of upstate New York. Downstate is the genesis of the majority of the legislators. Downstate has more votes, not that anyone acts for political reasons in the legislative body, but it happens to have more votes. It's where they were representing, so upstate New York did not get the attention they needed. One of the things I'm most proud of is when I came in, we reversed that 180 degrees. And we said, we pointed to the truth, which was upstate New York had gotten the short end of the stick for a long time, and we were going to right that wrong. It was also unintelligent from downstate New York's point of view because we're one state. And if upstate doesn't do well, then downstate doesn't do well because they're going to be paying the cost anyway. So investing in upstate New York, investing in the corporations that aren't doing well, makes sense for the overall corporation. And our methodology was something we called the REDCs, Regional Economic Development Corporations. REDCs, which were Regional Economic Development Coalitions. Private business, top business leaders, top academic leaders, top political leaders in a regional context, all with putting together a plan for sustainable economic development long-term that the state would partner in. We announced regional economic development councils, and everybody said, oh boy, this is a new idea. Critics said the governor came up with some newfangled idea that he made up, like I just made it up one night. After a couple of glasses of wine, I came up with an idea. Actually, REDCs, you will know as empowerment zones. When I started at HUD, Bill Clinton was very interested in urban development. He had worked on it as governor in Arkansas, and he wanted to have a modern urban development policy. And we talked to everyone. We went through the Model Cities program, the UDAG program, what worked, what didn't work. And we then came up with the two current models at that time of economic development. One was Jack Kemp, who was HUD secretary. I had the good fortune, he's no longer with us, I had the good fortune to work with Jack Kemp before he passed. Beautiful man from Buffalo, New York. He championed enterprise zones. What were enterprise zones? zero tax regional zones. And his belief was the taxes are what causes business trouble. If you go to zero taxes, the businesses will move into that zone. And businesses will come from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, to come into a zone with zero taxes. And that was enterprise zones. That was a Republican concept. Democrats were more of a people-based strategy. We want to invest in the people, not just the place. And we don't want to subsidize business because business could come in and hire people from the suburbs. We actually want to have a strategy that works with people. We put the two together. We came up with Bill Clinton's empowerment zone concept. And empowerment zones were regional economic development. They were done on a competitive basis. They were place-based because they had boundaries, but they were also people-based because the services had to go to the individuals in that community. And it worked very well. There were a few commonalities. Everybody agreed that it had to be bottom-up, which is easier said than done. Really engaging the community, really getting them to speak, really getting them to buy in and be vested. It had to be comprehensive, no more piecemeal approaches. Transportation, housing, they all have to be there and they all have to work together. You have to have the private sector at the table. It has to be sustainable. Sustainable meaning that it develops an energy that allows it to continue beyond the immediate infusion. It can't just be when government is subsidizing the pump, it works. It's jump-starting a car, you put on the cables, you get a quick jolt of energy, you start it, but then that engine has to run on its own. The community development has to run on its own. And the lesson of critical mass, that if you try to do something too small, the surrounding community and problems will absorb your effort. The empowerment zones worked. We did a report afterwards. We did 100 all across the country. And they worked well. Some did better than others. Why did some do better than others? Two reasons. One, we made a little bit of I wouldn't say a mistake. In retrospect, we made a mistake. We knew that you needed enough funding to fund a large enough effort that you created a new dynamic in that community. That if you went in too small and you didn't really solve the problems would overwhelm whatever you did, right? You don't replace one house on a bad block in a bad neighborhood because that's not enough new energy. And our plan was to fund empowerment zones with significant funding. And we had a certain budget allocation from the White House. And we went up to the Hill, and it was the first time I was on the Hill. I was the assistant secretary. And we had a group that met with the head of Senate Finance, who at that time was, God bless him, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And I had met him before, but this was more of a professional meeting. And we went before him, and we were all excited, and we said, we want to, for presidential priority, we want to fund the Empowerment Zone program. He said, really? You know, he had that very New York way of addressing you. I said, yeah, we're very excited. And he said, well, how many are there going to be? I said, 5. We're going to do 5 zones across the country because we want to make sure they have enough money to really change the culture in that community. And one of the problems with model cities, UDAG, everybody got $1.50. Nobody had enough money to do anything real because they tried to spread it out too thin. We didn't want to make that mistake. We want 5 empowerment zones. And Senator Moynihan said to me, Mr. Secretary, because then assistant secretary is also called secretary. Mr. Secretary, did you say 5? I said, yes, I said 5. Um, how many senators are there in the Senate? Is it 100? 100. 100. 100. What's half of 100? Is it 50? 50. 50. 5. In other words, you can't get 50 votes for 5 zones. Because what you're saying to 45 senators is you're voting for something that you have no chance of winning. Make a long story short, the 5 zones grew to 100 zones. Congressional mathematics, I learned it right there. And the funding actually dropped. So all the zones did well. Some did better than others. The other variable on why some did better than others is applicable to every person in this room. And this was a story I heard during HUD, not actually a HUD lesson. It's the story of the farmer and the flood. Do you know the story of the farmer and the flood? The farmer is living out in the rural part of the county, and there's been rain for a few days, and the county officials have been watching the rain, and they understand that it's going to continue to rain, and now it's going to be a serious downpour. So the rain keeps coming, and the emergency management professionals for the county get in this big truck, and they go out to the rural part of the county, to the farmer's farmhouse. And they say to the farmer, you know, the rain is coming. It's going to be very bad, but we have a big truck. We're going to take you and your belongings to safety. And the farmer says, I'm a God-fearing man. I go to church every Sunday, and the Lord will take care of me. And they have a little back and forth, but the county officials give up, and they leave. Sure enough, it keeps raining and raining. Now there's 6 feet of water. But the county officials won't be deterred, and they get in a boat. And they take the boat, and they go out to the farmhouse. And they say to the farmer, we told you this was going to happen. It was going to rain, and there's a real problem, but don't worry, now we have a boat. And we're going to put you in the boat, we're going to put your belongings in the boat, and we're going to take you to safety. And the farmer says, no, I'm a God-fearing man. I go to church every Sunday. The Lord will take care of me. And they said, but there's 6 feet of water. This is your last chance. You have to get in the boat. And they go back and forth, but farmer's resolute. The farmer won't get in the boat. They leave frustrated. Keeps raining, and now the dam breaks. And now there's a terrible flood. And now the farmer is standing on the roof of the farmhouse. And the water is up to the farmer's neck, and just his head is above the water. And he's looking up, and as he's looking up, there's a rumbling sound. And the clouds start to part. And he looks up, and it's a helicopter. And it's the county officials in the helicopter. And they throw down a rope. And they say, grab the rope, we'll pull you to safety. And the farmer just said his brother, he says, no, I'm a God-fearing man. I go to church every Sunday, the Lord will take care of me. They said, forget that. You've been saying that, grab the rope. This is your last chance. Next scene, the farmer's at the pearly gates. And he meets our Lord, and our Lord says, welcome to heaven. And the farmer says, thank you, I guess it's better than the alternative. The farmer says, but you know what, I'm confused. I was a God-fearing man. I went to church every Sunday. I thought you would be there for me. And our Lord looked back at him and said, you're confused, I'm confused. I sent a truck, a boat, a helicopter. What happened? The point is, at one point, it is up to you. The HUD secretary, state of New York, we're making money available, housing money, sustainable development money. The environmental commissioner is here. There's environmental money. There's every kind of program. The secretary talks about tools in the toolbox. Everything you need to rebuild your community. More funding dedicated than ever before. We did not make the mistake of empowerment zones. Wound up in the empowerment zones, an enterprise community would win $25 million. Here, our grants are on average about $100 million per year per region. in our competition. So this is real funding. But it is up to you to make it work. Because community development, sustainable development, it is an art form more than it is a science. You are trying to create a culture. You are trying to create an energy. You're trying to take all these pieces, all these programs, all these grants, and fashion it into an approach that actually raises people in a place. And that has nothing to do with all these acronyms and REDC and CDBG. How do you take people and improve their lives, get them the education, get them the training, get them the jobs in the community, restore that hope, restore that opportunity, create that energy and that momentum where people start to feel, you know what, this is working. We have a future. It's coming back. Did you see Proctor's? Boy, I thought we were going to lose it. So beautiful. It would have been so sad. It's coming back. It's being restored. It's beautiful. Did you hear? A new business is moving into town. Real estate values are going up. You create that energy. That becomes infectious. And it becomes synergistic. And people start to believe in the place, and then they start to invest in their business. And then they start to improve their home. And then the values start to go up. And then more businesses come. That's what you have to do. There's nothing the secretary can do for you, or I can do for you, or any commissioner. We give you the palette with all these different colors of paint. But you have the brush. And you have the canvas, which is the community. And you have to take those colors and you have to paint a picture of economic opportunity, personal growth, economic growth that is sustainable for that community. And that community has to believe it, because if they don't believe it, then it's not going to happen. And to make them believe it, it had to be their plan in the first place. They had to buy in. They had to be vested. And you have to say, this is how Schenectady's coming back. This is how Saratoga's coming back. This is how Warren's coming back. And it's their plan and their life, and they buy in. So it is up to you. We have done our part. We have made every resource available. There are more resources for you to do your job than ever in history being provided by the state government. Never before has a state government come to you and said, I will be your partner, and provided more resources than this state government ever, ever, ever. But it's still up to you, because you have the paintbrush. I believe in you. You've made great progress already. The energy is turning. You can feel it. The optimism is back. We've had a big drop in unemployment, Mr. Secretary, and it's been all across the state. The old days, New York City would do better, but upstate would stay flat. Now, the progress is the same all across the state. And that is probably the greatest accomplishment, because we have economic success, but the greatest economic success, the sweetest economic success, is shared success. And now it is shared all across the state. That's where you are, Mr. Secretary, in the great state of New York. And the great state of New York owes you a special thank you for your service, first to the nation. I know how hard it is to hold the banner that you have held so high for so long. We owe you a debt of gratitude as a state. You've been very kind to us. What you've done working with Commissioner Rubin after Hurricane Sandy, your flexibility, your speed, which is not always the easiest thing at HUD, as we know. The agency work, you made it responsive, you advocated for us. We built back in a way, frankly, I didn't know that we even could when we first saw the destruction and the damage. So we are so grateful for everything that you have done. You've been such a friend to this great state. You've done the job remarkably well. They said great things about you when you were mayor of San Antonio. And San Antonio breeds some fantastic HUD secretaries. Henry Cisneros was also from San Antonio. But with all the rave reviews you got when you were appointed, your performance was even better. Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Castro.
Thank you. All right. Good morning. Well, first of all, Governor, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. This is my first time in Schenectady. Hello, Schenectady. Hello. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you even more for the tremendous leadership that you have offered New York. The innovation, the vision, the hard work, all of that is paying off for this great state. And let's give our great governor a round of applause for his fantastic leadership. We also, of course, both have shared the title of Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. In fact, I was telling the governor, and I know I've told him over the phone before, that there's still many folks in the HUD building who remember his time fondly. And just about every day, I pass by his portrait in a hallway that I walk through at HUD. And so everyone at HUD sends you a big, heartfelt hello. And they thank you for the great work that you did for families of modest means that continues to pay off for those families and for cities throughout the United States, even today. When you say the name Cuomo at the Robert Weaver Building, you get a lot of smiles there. As you know, Governor, there are folks who have dedicated decades of their lives to making sure that other people have great opportunity in our country, and they remember your leadership well. So thank you for that. I also want to give a shout out to our Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Hochul, for your leadership and the fantastic work that you're doing here in New York. I know that you had an opportunity to serve in Congress with my brother Joaquin, I believe. I have a twin brother, Joaquin, and you won't mind this since you're no longer in Congress. Joaquin likes to say that the way to tell us apart is that I'm a minute uglier than he is. I tell people the way to tell us apart is that, you know, both of us live in Washington, D.C., but he's in Congress, so I'm the only one that actually works in Washington, D.C. I know that you've made the most of your time as Lieutenant Governor and serving this great state, and I'll take your regards to Joaquin when I talk to him. I also want to give a shout out to the city of Schenectady. And I know that we've worked together with Mayor McCarthy and his team on a 2-year community needs assessment to prioritize the city's needs and goals. And we are almost finished. So where is Mayor McCarthy here? Let's give our mayor a good round of applause. Y'all also have a first-rate housing authority here in Schenectady. And I want to particularly thank Executive Director Rich Homenack for his leadership. Among other things, a few years ago in 2013, y'all made almost half of your public housing smoke-free. And I know that that has had so many health benefits. Let's give them a round of applause for their vision. I also want to commend all of the local officials who are in the audience. I got into public service a few years ago, 15 years ago now, because I had grown up in a political family as well, although my mother never held office, but I'm sure you can commiserate with this, Governor. When I was young, she used to drag my brother Joaquin and I to rallies and speeches, and I remember sitting when I was 9 or 10 years old through a 3-hour-long organizational meeting where all the adults were talking about stuff I didn't understand. And if you had told me when I was 15, do you ever think you'll get into politics? I would have said not just no, but hell no. But I didn't get interested in going into public service until I went away from my community. Joaquin and I had grown up in the public schools of San Antonio on the west side there, and then we went to Stanford. And I saw in the Bay Area a comparison that in some ways was good, in some ways was bad. I saw the good in my community, a place that was very culturally rich, a place where people of different backgrounds had come together over the years and forged a wonderful place to raise a family, a nice place to live, a kind of place I used to like to say that if two people pass each other on the sidewalk, that they still look each other in the eye. People are not afraid of each other. There's still a sense of connection between folks. At the same time, I saw in the Bay Area a place that had higher income levels, higher education levels. It was the early 90s, a place that was more ready for the future, innovative and entrepreneurial. And so my interest in public service really came out of kind of a chip on my shoulder about the hometown that I had grown up in. And this idea of how could you combine the best of those two things? A place that was culturally rich and family friendly and a nice place to live and a place where people had a sense of community, but also one that was well educated and had great jobs and had good economic development and was ready for the 21st century. And in so many ways, whether you live in a city or a very small town in urban or rural America, that's what we all want, is a place where we can live comfortably with a great quality of life and also make it and live our American dream. And so I commend all of the local officials here who are working on that every single day, oftentimes in a context where people of different backgrounds and persuasions roll up their sleeves with the wind at their back because everybody wants to see the city do well, and they just work at it together. And so give yourselves a round of applause for the work that y'all do every single day. So, the governor and I were frankly also commiserating about a few weeks ago. And as you might imagine, as we approach the end of 2016 and the end of the Obama administration, there is a decent amount of uncertainty about the years ahead, certainly about the next few months. But one thing is very clear, and that's that our nation has made tremendous progress over the last 8 years. When President Obama took office, national home prices had fallen by 20% since 2005, leaving nearly 13 million households underwater on their mortgages. Americans in every state, in every community, including, of course, here in New York, felt that intimately. At the same time, our economy was losing 700,000 jobs a month in early 2009. Today, our national unemployment rate is half what it was before. We've had 78 straight months of job gains, the longest unbroken string on record, adding up to 14 million more jobs in our country. Not only that, but some 20 million more Americans have health care because of the Affordable Care Act, keeping working families healthy and productive. And that stronger economy has produced a housing market recovery of historic proportions. It's helped Americans recover over $6 trillion in real estate equity lost during the last decade. And the thing is that we need to keep working in towns, in cities, in states, and in the United States, because not all communities have shared equally in this robust recovery. As y'all know, many still face challenges. This region has an impressive record, particularly under the governor's leadership, of economic development and reinvention, backed up by an even more impressive labor force. Governor Cuomo's support of upstate New York's economic recovery is well known, but he and Commissioner Jamie Rubin, and I want to recognize Jamie. Thank you for your good work as well. They also deserve praise for an ambitious $20 billion housing plan they developed for affordable senior and family housing, as well as supportive housing to combat homelessness. What we see in the United States, in cities big and small, is an affordable housing crisis. And I'm proud to say that New York has been ambitious in meeting that crisis. I particularly want to thank the governor and his team for developing a program to provide gap funding for rental assistance demonstration conversions, the only statewide program in the United States of its kind. Together, the state and HUD will help preserve thousands of units of public housing throughout New York and provide opportunity for seniors and families that need it. In the past 2.5 years, I've been to over 100 cities. And so I hear what you're saying, Governor. I can certainly empathize with that phone call that you made to Governor Cuomo a couple of decades ago. You're right. As y'all might imagine, I've seen during that time a full range of innovation, of policy approaches, frankly, of both successes and failures in cities. I've been able to see how HUD's numerous initiatives can help cities grow sustainably and inclusively and reach the bottom line for what we do, which is to improve people's lives throughout the country. Schenectady, Albany, and other communities in the capital region have not been bashful about taking up these challenges and linking to HUD programs. Upstate cities are using that alphabet soup of programs that we offer, of CDBG, of Section 8, of HOPWA, of any number of investments to address some of the region's most pressing needs. I can assure you that we want to work with you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to HUD and Region 2. And I want to recognize Holly Light. Where'd Holly go? She's our Region 2 administrator. There she is. She's doing a fantastic job. And she has been, in the Region 2 office, a connector to resources for communities throughout upstate New York. Now, as a former mayor, I also know that there are often barriers that stand in the way of great opportunities. And so, just recently, one of the President's initiatives to support efforts like this to create sustainable development is something called the Housing Development Toolkit. It spells out ways to reduce counterproductive local barriers that restrict building new housing, especially barriers that can limit new multifamily or affordable housing. The toolkit addresses challenges that you're probably familiar with, especially those of you who serve in local government. Expensive land use restrictions, restrictive zoning, excessive off-street parking requirements, arbitrary or antiquated preservation regulations, residential conversion restrictions, and often painfully slow permitting processes that too often times discourage the creation of more housing opportunity. As a result, these accumulated barriers produce ever tighter housing markets that can ultimately stifle growth and damage a city's competitive edge and even our national productivity. The toolkit spells out actions by state and local jurisdictions to turn this around, such as greater use of by right development, streamlined permitting, expanded zoning for multifamily housing, density bonuses, inclusionary zoning, and a lot of other changes. And just 2 weeks ago, we also launched something that we call the Prosperity Playbook, an online compilation of resources for and by state and local decision makers about how to expand affordable housing and economic mobility within their jurisdictions. The playbook describes ways that communities can balance competing interests with more inclusive regional planning. For example, to produce more affordable housing choices, especially for vulnerable populations, such as the elderly. Now, we plan to keep this site interactive. Cities can add their experiences to it over the following months, and I suspect that communities here have a lot of best practices to add to this growing wealth of innovation. You are doing many visionary things, and I want to commend you for them. We also know that smart housing regulation can provide significant benefits, leading to more inclusive, less segregated urban and regional communities, and ultimately, a more productive, more competitive economy. At the same time, HUD has also found that too many landlords, for instance, discriminate against low-income families with our housing choice vouchers. Despite federal fair housing laws, their actions have a negative impact on families trying to transition from life on the street to a stable home to call their own. It's more common and most harmful in high-barrier rental markets, something that New York State as a whole, I know, knows a lot about. But wherever it happens, it's not just unacceptable, it's a drag on the regional, the state, and the national economy. So as we've invested in neighborhoods to lift up neglected communities, we've also expanded fair housing rules and enforcement. For example, a new rule we finalized in September prohibits housing providers from requiring English proficiency by renters or buyers, requirements that discriminate on the basis of national origin. We also issued a rule that prohibits housing providers from demanding sexual favors or otherwise harassing tenants as a quid pro quo for access to housing or for such services as equipment repairs. Unfortunately, something that happens much more often than most people think. Another rule addressed the problem of local nuisance ordinances that can lead to evictions of battered women if they report their abusers to the police, essentially victimizing them twice. And these build on the rule we established last year to bolster the duty of affirmatively furthering fair housing. It spells out specific actions required to overcome historic patterns of segregation, to promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities that are free from discrimination. In total, these new rules flow from our belief that every American deserves to live in dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Our belief that there can never be any second-class citizens, whether in the smallest town or the biggest city. Finally, I want to thank many of you here today for your leadership in combating homelessness. Since President Obama announced his Opening Doors initiative in 2010, nationwide we have witnessed a 14% decline in homelessness, including a 27% decline in chronic homelessness and a 23% drop in the number of homeless families. And thanks to the outstanding leadership of First Lady Michelle Obama, the leadership of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, leadership here in New York, and among local leaders throughout the United States, we've reduced homelessness among our nation's veterans by nearly half between 2010 and 2016. So far, yeah, that's definitely something to be excited about for our nation. And I want to particularly recognize this region. So far, under the Mayor's Challenge to End Veteran Homelessness, 3 states and 31 cities have effectively ended veteran homelessness. And upstate New York has been among our greatest success stories, with every major city having achieved that goal. And I actually have the list right here in front of me. I want to recognize these cities: Albany, Feel free to give a shout out to your city when you hear it. Saratoga Springs, are they in the house? Schenectady. Amsterdam. Utica. Binghamton. And Troy. And in all, 14 cities across the state of New York have reached that goal, making New York the most prolific in achieving the effective end of veteran homelessness in local communities. Give yourselves a round of applause for that fantastic work. You know, these past 8 years, between early '09 and what will soon be early 2017, during these years we've worked together to recover from what was the deepest economic downturn in our country since the 1930s. And I have to say that together we've developed a robust momentum going forward. And whatever uncertainties there are about future federal leadership in housing and urban development, I believe that your commitment is strong and enduring, and that this spirit and initiative will continue to yield results that benefit everyone in this region and across this state, and continue to show the way for people across the United States. You have all the necessary ingredients for success: a productive workforce, strong state and local leadership, an enviable capacity for growth in innovative technology, a commitment to mixed-income housing, and a community ready to tackle new challenges. All of that adds up to tremendous potential in the capital region for broad and shared inclusive prosperity, where opportunity to reach the American dream is ample. I know that the stakes are high, but so are the possibilities, and so is your ability and your leadership. I know that you're up to the challenge. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, for that necessary reminder of what we attained in the late 8 years under President Obama. And I do believe that historians will look back kindly on this 8-year era as the time when America came back. And we'll never forget the important role that you played as a Secretary of HUD. And what a special day. Thank you. Thank you. And how unique for us to have two HUD secretaries in the same room at the same time. And so, Governor, I want to thank you also for giving me the privilege of being your point person on the Regional Economic Development Councils, because as much as you came up with this vision, whether it was after a couple of glasses of wine or it fermented a little bit earlier, I'm able to go out and see firsthand, literally in the streets, walking with the mayors I see here and the elected officials that I've come to know in this region. And it's been such a privilege. And I was a local official for almost 20 years. And never once did I see a truck, a boat, or a helicopter come rescue us from our state legislature or from Albany. So I want to thank you for this, and I want to make sure our local officials don't take for granted the partnership that you have with this particular governor, because I did not experience this in a long time, and that's why it's a very special time. And I will simply say that I had the privilege of also going out on Small Business Saturday last weekend, and I went to small businesses in parts of the state that had given up for lost. I shopped at a women's clothing store in downtown Buffalo at Canal Side, where there had been a parking lot and a brownfield 2 years before. So that is success, Governor. That is success. So I will speak more this afternoon, opening up the afternoon session about what I've experienced in this special capital region. But at this point, I'm going to announce that we are breaking out into our morning sessions. And in this room, we're going to have a panel discussion led by Jamie Rubin, the Commissioner of New York State Community of Homes and Community Renewal. And he'll be speaking on the topic of local tools for sustainable best practices and adaptive use. Thank you, Jamie. And that'll be right here in this room. And across the hall, in Key Hall, across from where you checked in, we'll have a panel discussion led by Rosanna Rosado, the New York Secretary of State, on the topic of downtown redevelopment as an economic catalyst. So your choice, and we'll reconvene after those meetings. We'll get together for an afternoon session after lunch as well. So thank you all for joining us.